So we're really excited today to be talking about Sean's book, 11 Lessons for Growth and Physical Therapy, written by Dr. Sean Lordan, aka my husband and CEO of Concierge Physical Therapy. So Sean, my first question to really ask you is, what made you want to write this book?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it was years in the making, quite honestly. I think that also the field has changed a lot since COVID happened.
Right.
We've seen a shift really from all in-person education toward almost like a hybrid approach to physical therapy, education.
Right.
And what we're seeing, at least at a clinical level, is less hands-on, really training. And that's something that we tend to focus on more here. Obviously, that's an important part of the way that we practice at Concierge. So that first 6 months to a year, we really want to train our people to be great at using their hands. So it's hard to then train them on all the soft skills and the communication skills and everything else didactically that they just, it's just, you're not picking that up right away when you first graduate, from PT programs. So it's the PT programs tend to, really teach to the CAPD criteria so that you can pass the boards. That's their job.
Mm-hmm.
The PT program, and, I just had Adam Thomas on here and, we talk about education and, the job of the PT program is to get you to really just, again, pass the boards, and you're dangerous when you first graduate as a PT, right? Like you got enough information to be a generalist, but you don't have enough information to really dial in and specialize. So the soft skills or the communication skills that we talk about or that I talk about or share in my 11 lessons are really a distillation of what some of the hard lessons that I learned, coming out of school, because nobody taught me these lessons.
Yeah.
I had to learn them, oftentimes the hard way. So that's just that's the reason I wrote the book.
Yeah. I think that's like the biggest thing, right, in any career is, when you first come out of school, you're really learning through like your failures, and regardless of the industry, right? Like dependent on, let's just say healthcare, since we're both in healthcare, you come out and you learn what works for a patient or what doesn't work for a patient. And those inexperiences are what really shape you to be a better clinician or a better, individual in whatever career that you have. I think, going off of that, and we'll get into like the details of the 11 lessons, but what do you feel like is the biggest mistake that new grads tend to make when they first come out of school?
I think the biggest mistake that new grads tend to make is they try to do too much too soon. I think that depending on what you're trying to get into, obviously we're in orthopedics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's also several different specialties in orthopedics that you can get into. You can get into pediatrics, you could be, into geriatrics, neurology,
Right.
Sports, right? My brain, it's tough because I like sports and orthopedics, so I went kind of the OCS track. But I would challenge somebody who's just out of school to really just get used to your surroundings for the first 6 months. It's really hard just making that transition from taking afternoon naps at school to working 40 hours a week. We laugh about it, but, and everybody, I feel like every generation kind of looks at the generation behind them and they're like, oh, they're lazy, they're entitled, this work-life balance, yada, yada, yada. And quite frankly, it's a tough transition to go from taking a nap in the afternoon and really having a lot of time to then entering a truly structured environment where you're working 40 hours a week with expectations, expectations to perform and to, at least if you work for us, to be held to a certain standard, both culturally and from a metric perspective. So, we talk about this all the time that we look for really like the top 5% of PTs. And I think it's so easy as a new grad to just blend in and just do the bare minimum, even though you come out of school and you're gung-ho and you want to become excellent, right? You want to be the best clinician ever when you get out of school. But then 3 years go by and you're like, oh man, is this what I'm doing for the rest of my life?
Right.
Or sometimes it's a year.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. and
That's real.
you got heavy student loans, and it's a tough job. It can be a grind, if you don't look at it the right way. So I
Mhm.
think, those first 6 months, just learn your surroundings. I wish somebody had told me that, because I got out of school. I'm like, I got to do this, 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 and this. I was working 2 or 3 jobs. We both worked in skilled nursing. I worked as a personal trainer as well on top of that. And, looking back, I don't have regrets, but I think that um, it's a really developmental time, those first 6 months to a year. And I was fortunate to be in a great environment with Tom and Eileen Murphy.
Yeah. You really touched on the first lesson there. I don't know if you did that strategically, but you said in your book during that first lesson, and above all, remember this first lesson: your early career is a time for exploration. The more diverse your experiences, the more skilled and adaptable you will become. Embrace the journey, and you'll build a career that not only sustains you, but also fulfills you in ways you never imagined. And that's basically what you just said. And I think that ties in nicely to like, what do you see the biggest mistake be? And, a lot of the times we see younger clinicians come out and they don't have that open mind, right? How many times do we talk to a younger clinician and just like you said, they want to work with athletes, or they only want to see this one patient population, and what they don't realize is from other patient populations you learn how to be a better PT from treating athletes.
Yeah, and again, it's so funny. I see this, like, all these memes, or all these like videos on these PT
You learn through
influencers,
algorithm, that's why.
and
Or
they're like,
created one.
they're telling new grads, like, if there isn't turf, don't work there. If there aren't 100-pound weights, don't work there. And I literally laugh at that stuff because, again, like, if you have a rotator cuff injury and you're trying to bench press 100 pounds, like 100-pound dumbbells on each side, like,
Sure.
it's just banana land.
Yeah.
I think that there's a medium in everything. And I think obviously we have turf at most of our clinics, and,
Right.
there is a place for return to sport and return to athletic, care. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, an ACL or a total hip or a total knee, they're boring to me because it's protocol based. What I love is the chronic pain, like the knee, the low back.
But you didn't look like that at first.
I don't know about that. I think I was frustrated because
Yeah.
I couldn't fix them because I didn't have the skills nor
Sure.
really the scope and honestly the experience to fix people. So that's sort of what drove me down the track to get the didactic education at MGH and do that OCS training program. That helped me a lot, and then I had great mentors who taught me how to use my hands well. But yeah, it was frustrating at first for a long time trying to fix chronic pain. And then you get good at it. You're like, wow, this is pretty special,
Yeah.
versus just like seeing athletes all the time. You don't learn at the same clip. This is just my personal opinion, but you don't learn at the same clip following a protocol because it's just healing guidelines. It's healing timelines. It's just got to do what's on the protocol. You can kind of do some different things based on the sport, and that's cool. But to me, I think you learn so much more by individually assessing people and really kind of dialing in your diagnostic skills to fix people where they're at.
Sure. Yeah.
Versus just a post-op. It's just kind of like, to me, it's much more simpler care.
More regimented. Yeah.
Much more regimented. And that to me is just not what I love to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your second lesson, because that leads us nicely into that. And that's really about like advanced clinical pathways, and advanced, education, within the field. What does that kind of mean to you? And when do you think that fits in to, somebody's career path?
Yeah. I think the advanced clinical education is an interesting thing. I think that some people are ready for it right when they get out of school. I know that they have OCS residency tracks right out of school.
Mhm.
I think Duke has one. I know MGH has one. I'm sure there are several more around the country. I personally believe that it's important to get some actual work experience, kind of like an MBA,
Mm.
right? Like, you get an MBA like right after, your 4 years of undergrad, you have no practical application of that master's in business, right? Versus you go back for an MBA after, 10 years of running a business, it's just going to be infinitely more valuable to you. So, my path was I think I worked for about 2.5 years. I had worked in home, like at that point, I had worked in skilled nursing. I'm not sure if I'd gone into home health yet, but I had taken a side job in acute care too. I really wanted to get the full scope of what PT was before I honed in and said, like, okay, I'm going to start an orthopedic practice.
Mhm.
Um, because I wanted to challenge my own preconceived notions that I wanted to be an orthopedic PT. I always knew that, but who knows? You could love acute care, you could love peds. Um, so I think that that's important to think about that. But I just think that, working for a year as a generalist helped me tremendously because just gives you more scope when you then go to specialize. Versus you specialize right away, and it's like, well, you don't really have anything to reference. A
Yeah.
failed rotator cuff surgery or a failed rotator cuff recovery. A low back that you could just never fix and needed to go for surgery. Some of the more difficult, chronic,
Mhm.
regional pain syndrome, some of these like kind of more difficult cases.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm not sure if that answers that question, but I think working for a year is really important before you think about really kind of diving in and specializing in peds or even women's health. I know it's a big push to get women's health certified right out of school nowadays. Um, and I think that's like a weekend course. I don't think it's crazy right now with the Herman and Wallace, but if you want to do a course like that a couple months in, I think that's fine. And especially if you're working at a clinic with women's health. But I think going down a real track, like the
Right.
OCS track is a serious, it's a serious commitment. So, um, yeah, just think about it.
It's an interesting angle too, because there's the flip side of that, right? There's clinicians who want to do all the things right away and, want to become a specialist and, want to take the weekend course, which we both know a weekend course doesn't make you a specialist in anything. You
Yeah.
could take a weekend course in whatever. And again, you still have to like see the patients and see the outcomes. Like you're just getting the knowledge. Like it's one thing to hear the knowledge, but
Yeah.
it's another thing to apply said knowledge and actually become that better clinician. But on the flip side, you see other right clinicians that are almost too scared to do the extra, just want to be complacent. And maybe sometimes they utilize, well, I just got out of school. So for the next 3 years, I'm just going to focus on treating my patients, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But being a constant learner is really how you transform yourself, not just as a clinician, but as a person, right? So, what's the flip side to that? Like, waiting those 1 to 3 years, but what about people that don't want to do anything?
Yeah, and I don't think that I'm recommending don't do anything. I think, there's plenty of books that you can read. I was, nose deep in JOSPT for the first year out of school. I took dry needling. I took a bunch of courses, I think, right out of school.
Mhm.
But it was just it's a big life transition. And I also think that, and I don't know if this is the correct use of, imposter syndrome, but like you go from a student to a doctor overnight.
It's true.
And I think that that's a big change for people, myself included, especially with the confidence. I think that I was fortunate, I'm pretty confident, but there's a difference between confidence and competence. And you really don't learn competence until you've been out of school for a little while.
Right.
You're almost, so much, you're almost a little dangerous. So I think there's that. I also think that with younger PTs, and to your point about complacency, I would hope that there isn't complacency. I think it may be a fear of failure to a certain degree. I think that, think about it, in school, these PTs, like every PT, you have to have a 3.5 or 3.3 at least
To
GPA to
stay in
get
the
through
school.
to
Yeah.
stay in the school. So you've never failed, most likely, through school. Like since you were 5 years old, you probably never gotten a D or an F or a C, like maybe one time, right? And I think when you get to the real world, and it's like, hey, and especially for us, like our expectations of our PTs are high, right? And they're that way for a reason because, our PTs are excellent here, and I think that when you come out of school and you're expected to be a great teammate, and a culture holder, and you're expected to deliver, care with excellence, and deliver to the level of your team, there's a lot of pressure involved in that,
Right.
and you're going to fail. And I think that there's this fear of failure often where people won't raise their hand because they're afraid sometimes to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
and I definitely see that a lot in the younger generation.
Yeah. That kind of goes in nicely to your next lesson, which talks a lot about like growth and like the trajectory of like charting your first like 5 years in physical therapy. And you talk about something that we actually talk a lot about here at CPT, which is leadership. And when that begins. And where I'm going with that is, maybe as a newer clinician, when you come out of school, that's the piece that you don't really have. And you kind of put the leadership off in your mind to maybe later in your career to think about, or you don't want to think about it at all. But the reality is, when you come out of school and you are a clinician, you are a leader of your own caseload. You have to be, right? Like you are determining people's plans of care and you're communicating that. And whether that's not the idea of leadership that you had, that part of your growth like really needs to begin kind of early in a sense. And maybe that's, you know, doesn't look the same as when we're training leaders to become clinic directors or area directors or, ops directors, whatever it may be. But what's your thought on that? As a physical therapist, like, I guess what I'm asking is, what are you taught in school? And then does that translate to when you come out, or how can you kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, the leadership education at the PT school level is just, again, it's difficult, right? Because they're teaching a CAPT criteria. They're not teaching you to be the best leader in a clinic. So, we've created and really kind of systematized a leadership training program over the past, like, really like year and a half, 2 years, for foundational leadership, for next level leadership, for emerging leaders, and then for like really area director and VP C-suite level. And I think that what I would challenge a new grad to do is to find a company that's willing to invest in them on the leadership side of things, because you're both a leader to your caseload, but then you need to understand the concept of being a great follower too. Because before you're really a leader at any clinical level, you have to be enjoyable to lead.
Right.
They say that one of the qualities of of people that get to the highest levels in business are that they're just likable people. Like, nobody's going to promote somebody who's an a-hole. It's just the truth. Like, you
Right.
don't want to promote a-holes, right? So, you
True.
know, two books that I really found to be helpful for me, that I should probably reference more often if I'm being honest, are Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey,
Hmm.
and then whatever that Dale Carnegie book is, I think it's like How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yep.
There's so many truisms in these books, right? But it's like you just need to be reminded of them every once in a while.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, there are several concepts, especially in the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, of, just being a good listener, being genuinely curious about people and asking them questions. There's a quote, and I'm sure I'm going to blow it, but it's something to the tune of, you know, to be curious, or, it's something like, to be liked, you must first like, right? Or to be thought of as kind, you must first provide kindness, right?
Hmm.
Just sort of along those lines. You know, I think that, again, those two books are pretty. I mean, they're New York Times bestsellers year over year, but
Yeah.
they kind of help me scope a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You touched on like the art of communication, which is actually one of your lessons in the book, how to communicate like a professional. That's lesson number 6.
yeah,
And there's so much to that, right? In any profession, regardless of whether you're coming out of school to be a physical therapist or you're just, in the workforce. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what have you seen successful communicators do? Like if there was somebody listening to this and they just want like those few quick tips, what do you feel like, a true successful communicator really does consistently?
I think the first rule of successful communication, and a rule that I probably broke for 10 years after being out of school, was just learning what kind of style communicator you are, right? You need to start with yourself. So you need to understand your tendencies in order to then understand how to communicate with others.
Right.
I always thought wrongly that because I'm a direct communicator, that people would understand what I'm saying. Right. And it's kind of oxymoronic. I still don't really understand, for the record, why people don't understand what I'm saying when I'm direct with them. But, we use the disc profile here. And so I'm a DC. So I'm very direct and I'm numbers oriented. And that's how I kind of speak to people. So that's 3% of the population, right? So I can speak to another DC 3% of the time. 3 out of 100 people are going to be able to speak with me on a level that they get it, I get it, we're good.
Mhm.
Most people are peacemakers. Do you want to talk about the peacemaker profile?
Sure. I'm not one, so now I have to like go back in my Rolodex and think of this, but our peacemakers, usually healthcare workers are peacemakers, and it kind of makes sense. They're relationship oriented and they're a little bit slower paced. So they're really looking to understand people. They have a lot of empathy, and they're really going to be thoughtful in their interactions. Peacemakers are never going to stir the pot. So they're not going to provide you with that healthy conflict of conversation that we know like we really need to be productive and be successful. However, they are going to be the best at resolving conflict. So I think that, when you think about communicating with a peacemaker, the approach really needs to come from a place of slowing down and truly understanding that they're really looking at building that connection and that relationship first to communicate, versus like Sean, you mentioning how you're very direct. That's not going to sit well with them because they need to have the relationship first and the connection for them to really comprehend and then take into action what you need to say. And as a clinician myself, I've really feel as though being a good communicator has helped me build relationships and develop rapport with my patients, which then in turn creates trust. And if you don't build trust and a rapport with your patients as a clinician, I don't care how good your skills are, or what fancy letters you have, or what professional sports team you work for, they're not going to listen to you. They don't trust you. You don't have the relationship. They don't understand what you're saying. And you're never going to get anywhere with said patient.
It's a running joke in the field, and I think I was talking to Adam about this, Adam Thomas, on the podcast. Is like, you could be the best physical therapist in the entire world, like a billion letters after your name.
Mm-hmm.
But if people don't like you, you can never fix them because they're not coming back.
No.
Right. So you have to be able to, and that's why we talk about the DISC personality profiling is, first know thyself or know yourself, and then learn your teammates, and then start to learn about, your patients. Your patients, I somehow got through without even knowing about DISC until like 3 years ago. But, I think I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes.
Did you actually? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of patients left displeased when I was direct with them. But now knowing that half the population is peacemakers, so that's great. But these are lessons learned, and I joke like, that's a book of distillation of probably maybe $50 million worth of mistakes that I've made over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
In if that book can help accelerate anybody's learning by 5%, even 1%, then I hope it'd be worth. It's like 100 pages. I don't even think it's.
No,
a
it's
quick
such an
read.
easy read. It's such an easy read. Yeah.
But yeah, I think know thyself, and then just learn about the different communication styles. There's the S, which is a steady player. Your I is more your influencer, and your kind of, I think of them as an extrovert. I think of Brogan. Or you. Aren't you guys the same personality type?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, your wife sitting right here.
All right, that's good. Shout out to Brooke.
Shout out to Brooke.
And then we have precisionists, right?
Yeah.
So, and those are the PTs that tend to be really honed in, and they're analytical about the patient care.
Right.
So it's kind of I feel like it's a unique aspect of our company that we not only use that to teach our clinicians and all of our staff about themselves, but it elevates our teams so that people know under stress how to communicate with each other.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something else you said and that you mentioned it a couple times of, knowing yourself and how you communicate and looking within. That's really uncomfortable for a lot of people to do, especially when you're young. I mean, I'm about to turn 40, so I'm like basically like a seasoned old lady over here. And I can tell you that I've only just begun to truly like look within, over the past 5 years. And, part of that is right having children and you get into a different phase of your life. And, it's true that like with age, you just have additional life experiences and wisdom. But you talk about in the book about mindfulness, mindset, and, wellness. And I feel like that looking within, like that interpersonal search, which a lot of people are doing right now. Like there's a lot of talk around that, right? Within like the wellness industry. I think that's like a really good perspective. And some of these things, like you said, may just sound like kind of truisms, right? You hear them everywhere, but like, what does that really mean to you? Looking within, having a mindfulness approach, and really focusing on that mindset. Because I think that does tie into communication a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when I think of mindfulness and I can talk about what I do personally, right? And you can attest to this.
Sure.
I think of I think of journaling. I try to journal at night, if I have the opportunity. I just write down everything that I'm thinking. I always keep 2 or 3 notebooks next to me in my dresser or the nightstand or whatever. And Jolie uses them to color in the
Yeah.
morning, which is kind of
That's our
funny.
4-year-olds for everybody doesn't know that.
But like I'll take it out, and if I forget at night, sometimes first thing in the morning, I turn my phone off at night.
I
Because
hate that,
I know,
by the way.
but like I
What if
turn my
there's
phone,
emergency?
I turn my phone off at night
Call me if anybody's listening. Don't call Sean, call me.
because I just don't want to be distracted, and I also want at least. I don't want to check my phone first thing in the morning because then you're
Right.
setting the tone for the day.
Yeah.
And I usually typically reach for, a pad of paper, and I write down the top things that are on my mind and maybe the things that I need to get accomplished that day. And then, I go downstairs, we kind of do our morning routine with the girls. And then on the way to the gym or on the way to work, I'll listen to the daily calm for 10 minutes. So that's sort of a 10-minute meditation. I'm honestly not great with it. Like I could be better about paying attention. I'm also driving. But I think that I've done the daily calm both lying down and my mind wanders. I think that I like it in the car. It kind of gets my brain away. I start to breathe a little bit, and that's just where I am in that meditative journey. I also like Fridays. I try to spend an hour just like sitting down somewhere and just thinking, an hour or two just thinking and really reflecting on the week and planning for the next week.
Hmm.
That I'm fortunate I block that time, and that's really for me like CEO time. That's the time that I plan, I review what went well the last week, what we could have improved on, and then I plan for the next week of what action am I personally going to take to get the company to the next level. So if we're talking about it, to a younger PT or a staff PT or even a clinic director or area manager, my thought would be make sure that there's time in every single one of your days, whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 20. I think less than 10 is you're just not prioritizing it to just like spend with a daily calm. I think the daily calm is like $100 a year or something like that. But the guided meditations are nice, and it gives you just 10 minutes for yourself, for your mental health, for your brain. And then just journal, like figure out a time to journal. And we talk about that in my other book is habit stacking. So if you wake up and journal and then you brush your teeth, or you wake up and brush your teeth and then journal, or just figure out a place to put that habit in your daily workflow.
Yeah. I've been trying to embrace something lately. So Sean knows this, but I'm a worrier, always have been my whole life, come from a long line of worriers. So for me, I always tried to suppress that. Like, when you're talking about mindset, like, oh, Brooke, just be positive. And it's funny because I feel like if you ask maybe a lot of my friends growing up who, you know, aren't as close to me right now, I guarantee you they would tell you that I was always so positive, always so happy. And yes, I was. I was a kid, but also my coping was to suppress any of the worrying and anxiety and just, kind of try to ignore it. And what I've learned recently when you are really thinking about mindset, those are part of you. Worrying is normal. Stress is normal. Anxiety is a normal part of life. And sometimes what really helps you to really delve into a mindset that you want is to acknowledge that you have those moments. And when you do have those moments, not trying to suppress them, but trying to like use those as a different set of energy, taking that worry, taking that anxiety, taking that negative mindset and, saying, yeah, okay, I do feel this way. I do have energy here, but can I take that energy and put it into something else? Because is this giving me what I want? And 10 out of 10 times, it's never giving you what you want, right? When I worry about the things that I worry about, the worrying is not the solution. Even if I start to think about the solution, they're not actually solutions I can control, right? But if I take all that energy and I harness into something else, it's super powerful. And that's really, the mindset shift. It's not ignoring the bad. It's not ignoring the worry. It's you trying to utilize that and shifting that into something positive. But I think there's that took me a long time. Maybe I'm just the only one, but like that's taking me a long, and it's still like work I have to do. But when I can do that, I can become so much more productive in, my creative strategy for the business, in my ability to be a mom, in my ability to just be Brooke, whatever that may be, a wife, whatever I want to be that day. There's so much power to that. And, that takes real intention and like thought.
Yeah. And I think just naming the emotions.
You're good at that. You're good at that. I feel like, well, you feel your feelings sometimes too. We all do.
Well, I think everybody does. I mean, if you don't,
you got to, right?
If you don't, I had a tough time when my dad passed, but it's your parent passing. Like that's a real, like you have to acknowledge that and you have to sit with those emotions for months
It's
sometimes,
yeah.
But if you don't and you just internalize them, like that's a really tough, I don't want to live that way. I choose not to live that way. But I think identifying, really identifying what the emotions are, whether it's worry, whether it's anxiety, identify it.
Yeah.
And then just breathe it away.
Yeah.
It's because if you can't control it.
That we've been reading, like the self-sabotage book. It's a really good book. You sent it to me. Anyways, it will come to me. I'm going to look it up when you're talking.
Okay.
But that's really what you're talking about is like, not taking those emotions and letting it define you, like identifying it but you got to sit with it.
You have to acknowledge the feelings.
You have to acknowledge it. Yeah.
And again, back to a new grad PT, you're going to feel, like an imposter, right? It's normal to feel that way. And we talk about that in our foundational leadership. We talk about it as PTs elevate to team leads and clinic directors.
Yeah.
When you go from a teammate to then a team lead to then a clinic director to then potentially an area director, like all of those jobs are different, and there's different sets of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels weird. It feels weird at every level when you level up. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to have extra time in your day to think. When I first, became, and I really think that my evolution to a CEO kind of happened over the last 2 years or so. I've always been the CEO of the company, obviously, but I feel like when you're practicing and you're in the day-to-day and it's just really hard to think about the bigger decisions in the company when you're in it every single day.
Sure.
And it's probably why the bigger companies bring people in from the outside sometimes to give you a fresh perspective, because there's so much emotion involved too, And I think that's where we go back to communication. It's so tough when you like people, right? You really personally like them, but they're not maybe doing the job to your expectation.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's where clarity is kindness. We talk about that all the time.
I got the book now. It's The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. I want to totally switch gears, like go like in a completely different direction. So one of your lessons here is Finance 101 as a PT. So just for everybody listening, Sean is super good with these types of things. I think like better than the average person. Like some of the things that you come up with from a financial perspective, I don't know, maybe I just don't watch the same things as you on Instagram, but like I don't
It's probably just my Instagram algorithm.
No, but so I think this is really important because, as a clinician, we all go to school. I'm a speech path, so rehab field. We all go to school. We pay a lot of money to get our degrees, and we come out and we're not making what we should be making. Like, let's just be honest there. We all know that, right?
Sure.
We're not making what a PA makes. We're not making what a nurse practitioner makes, but we went to school for the same amount of years.
Oh yeah.
And we basically do the same thing in a different way, right? We get people better.
hmm
So if there was one financial tip, because we're talking about your 11 successes for growth and success in physical therapy, or lessons, excuse me. What would be like the number one tip you would give to a new grad coming out of school financially, knowing what they're going to make as a salary? What's the number one thing? And we live in Massachusetts, so
It's not one thing. It's probably three to
okay.
5 things. I'll give you 3 things. I think the first thing is invest in yourself, meaning get smart on personal finance. I don't care what your views are on Dave Ramsey or The Millionaire Next Door or Rich Dad, Poor Dad, whatever. Read all the books and make up your own mind. The common thread between it all is you can't spend money that you don't have, and you need to save and invest along and track the S&P 500. I'm not a financial advisor, but these are all the commonalities among all of these books. It's common sense. When you're 24 years old, you have theoretically 50 to 60 years of investing on your side. So whatever the amount of money that you can afford when you're 24, and for me, it was like $200 a month. I don't even think it was like $200 a month.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, 50 years of compounding is like somebody mentioned, is like one of the 7 wonders or one of the 8th wonder of the world. It might have been Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or somebody like that. Maybe I just butchered that reference, but compound interest use it. That's really probably the second piece. Is the first piece, educate yourself. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think I talk about the dichotomy between that and Dave Ramsey in the book. So buy the book if you buy my book if you want to learn a little bit more about personal finance. Negotiating your first job. I think that's really important. Companies like ours, we have a little bit more robust offerings than, maybe smaller businesses. And maybe bigger corporate chains have different things to offer as well. But just remember, with everything, there's different levels of expectations, right? So I think make sure that you're clear. Ask the company that you want to work for what their expectations of you are, especially if they're offering you a 6-figure salary right out of school with a huge sign-on bonus. In orthopedics in this area in the Northeast, that's generally a red flag. I think that the third piece, really is, again, like back to negotiation of that first job. Ask about student loan repayment programs that the company may have. I think that's really important. Ask the owners, what the opportunity is for you to make more money.
Yeah.
We've got opportunities for our staff that are go-getters to work per patient, work per diem beyond their 40 hours a week. You could also get another job. I had 2 other jobs, or, at many times I had 3 or 4 jobs, growing into this company. But my plan was always, I was clear on my plan that I wanted to save money and open up an orthopedic practice. That may not be for everybody. But I do think, while you're young in your 20s, just if you can work an extra 10 hours a week, that really helps you in the long run.
Sure.
Because when you have kids, you just have less, you have less flexibility.
Yeah.
And then you have parents that age, you want to be in a position where you can help financially.
Yeah.
And you're strong financially.
And everyone's financial goals are different, right? And to each their own. Some people want to, have a life that, people dream of. Some people want to just have, be able to come into work and do their job and have a steady job and be with their families. And that's what wealth looks like to them, right? I think it's all, your individual goals and like knowing what that is. And neither is wrong or neither is right. It really is individually based. And where I'm going with this too is I think there's a lot of thought in the industry that your earning potential is capped. Okay, maybe as just a PT, right? And what I mean by that is just a clinician working 40 hours a week, treating patients. Sure, insurance only reimburses so much and patients will only pay so much for our service. So, okay, maybe that is true. However, What I've always said about the rehab field in general is the number one thing you never have to worry about is, stability. You will always have a job. That's number one. And number two, it is what you make of it. I'm going to quote my dad, and I love this about my dad. And when I was going through that phase in my career where I was kind of like, oh my God, this is it. Like, I never had this grand idea of having all these fancy things in life, but I knew I wanted to be successful. And to me, there's a part of financial freedom that's tied to success, right? And I remember thinking like, this is it. This is my mundane, like day to day. This is all I do. And I loved being a speech path. And I was telling my dad, and he said, well, Brooke, you have two choices. Be happy where you're at or make more money. And it was just that just stuck with me because there is that opportunity. It is what you make of it. Like you said, you could work, 10 hours extra a week. That 10 hours extra a week could give you money that you can invest in the S&P 500. And that's going to, net you gains within, years that you can, utilize for your future. Or, you could learn a new skill. And what I mean by that is leadership, right? Learn a new skill that sets you apart. Ask a company, what are the additional unique opportunities for me here to invest in my career and invest in my financial freedom? I think that that's so powerful. And I know that's hard when you come out of school to even think about that. But if you have a vision of what you want your life to look like, you really have to ask yourself those things and then ask whoever you're going to work for the same exact things.
We talked about this when we talked to the Northeastern students.
We did, yeah.
We talked about,
yeah.
And I said, like, really that first month of your job, like when you first graduate school, I would challenge every new grad, and honestly, anybody who's listening to this podcast that's never done this before, close yourself in a room for like 4 hours, one day, Saturday, Sunday, you're not working, go to a comfortable spot, bring a pen and paper, and really close your eyes and do this exercise. Think about what your life looks like, what you want your life to look like 10 years from then. And then write a story as if you're currently living that life in present tense. The brain tends to work in the concept of manifestation is interesting to me. I think there's these Earl Nightingale videos, and I get everything on the Instagram, as I'm sure many people do on this who are listening to this podcast. They
probably follow TikTok, but yeah.
Or whatever, TikTok or Facebook, whatever you're listening to. Probably not Facebook. But if you can truly picture where you are in 10 years as if you're currently living that reality, not that you just want it, I truly believe that you have a much better chance of getting there than you do if you just never think about it. And I think that's what I've done. I'm sure we've both done this at different times. And
I've never written a story, but I like that.
Set goals. I set goals every single year. I set, really like 5 to 10 goals, big goals. And I set like 1 or 2 or 5 to 10 goals, and it's like 2 or 3 big ones. And then I just look back in January, like see how I did. And it's always kind of cool to see like, how we did compared to how we expected to do or where we wanted to be. Don't keep them in your head. Make sure you write them down. And you talked about wealth. And I think that that's something, I'm not sure if I really address it in the book, what wealth is, because I think that money is just like one of the facets of true wealth, right? And I think about, Sahil Bloom in his book, The 5 Different Types of Wealth. And I think about, he talks about financial, but obviously it's your time, right?
That's a big one.
Your social wealth, how deep are your relationships? We know that the Harvard longitudinal study has studied happiness and people, from zero until they've lived their entire lives. They said the number one most important thing to a happy life is strong relationships.
It's also the number one thing to a healthy brain.
And then there's physical wealth. So, and we talk about like your calendar, right? So we do this sometimes with our direct reports, like show me your calendar this week. And then I'll show you what's actually going to get worked on and what's going to get done. If I see a lot of meetings on there and not a lot of think time or a lot of execution time, then it's going to be a tough week to actually execute and get things done.
Right.
So I would challenge you, if you want to go to the gym, you want to have physical wealth, your 20s is a great time to build a strong like foundation of that. Because once you get into your 30s, your metabolism begins to change. You may have like one or two friends that get sick, like get cancer, or have to get diagnosed with something that could change their lives. You may lose a loved one. So mortality becomes ever more present when you hit your into your 30s, your late 30s and 40s. And not to go down that rabbit hole, but they say, I think Ray Dalio has this curve. Ray Dalio wrote the book, oh my goodness, I'll think of it in a second, but Principles is the name of the book. And one of his principles is he talks about the curve of life, and you're happiest in your 20s. And then it starts to curve down really until like the nadir is like early 50s, when often like what happens in your early 50s, your kids graduate high school, you become an empty nester. Your parents are typically in their 80s or 90s and often need a lot of care. If you're blessed, right? They may not be, but it's a really my point is this: every life gets more challenging, not
Mhm.
less challenging
Mhm.
in many cases. And I think that the challenges are a gift from God, because the challenges are what give you reference to the joy when you experience joy.
Yeah.
So I think when you experience a nadir event, like the death of a parent or a best friend or a good friend, you then get so much more joy from, the peak event
Mhm.
of, going to a wedding of your best friend, or personally, like the reference of getting married, or
Mhm.
some of the, the birth of a child. Like it gives you different
Mhm.
a reference point. So I think that uh, we definitely veered away from the financial piece there, but
Yeah, but I think it does go hand in hand, right? Because
there's
right, you
more
can
to a wealthy life
there's
than
more
just
to a
money.
wealthy nut life, right? Like, people think finance, they think wealth, they think greed. And,
Some people do. And
so
that's the other
that's what
thing,
I'm
is you
saying.
have to check your mindset.
You
So like,
gotta
I
check.
guess,
It all goes together.
we entered this, the
Yeah.
financial conversation. I said, I'll give you 3 tips, but the fourth thing is just being self-aware of, how were you raised around money, right? Like with our kids, there is no conversation about we can't afford it. We don't ever talk about that with our kids. We always talk about, okay, you want that, figure out a way to get it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like you want that toy, okay, I'm not going to just buy it for you, but what are you going to do to earn it?
Right.
We can always afford it, and
Mhm.
that's the way that I think about the business. That's the way I think about career advancement is, you want to get smarter, you want to get better at business. What are you doing to get better at business today?
Yeah.
Right? You want to show, you want to proof in the pudding and proof in the numbers that you're growing a huge company and an empire, right? What are you doing day to day to, to show that?
Yeah.
Right. And I think for the PTs, the young PTs listening to this, what are you doing day to day? If you want to be the best clinician, which the first 3 years of your
You
practice,
should. Yeah.
you better become the best clinician, because that's your
Right.
skill that you need to hone out. It's very
Absolutely.
simple.
Yep.
Get to be the best clinician. So what kind of courses are you taking?
Right.
What journals are you reading?
What books, what podcasts? There's
Who
so
is
much info.
mentoring you, and
Yeah.
who are you mentoring?
Absolutely.
What are you volunteering for?
Yep.
These are all questions that you have control over your life. And I
Yeah.
think that don't be a passenger in the ride of your life. Be in the
Absolutely.
driver's seat.
Absolutely. You end the book with faith and fulfillment as your 11th lesson. And we kind of talked about that a lot within all of them. And, faith, right, could be believing in a higher being, it could be believing in the universe or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be God. But talk a little bit about why you wrote about faith and fulfillment in this book as a lesson.
I think that it's so easy to get lost in the minutia of becoming the best clinician day over day over day over day over day. That's where the PTs that are like, "Oh man, like is this it? Is this what I'm doing for the rest of my life for
Mhm.
85 grand or 90,000 bucks a year or whatever? I can barely afford to live, never mind, pay a mortgage or buy a house or any of this stuff, right? Is this what it's all about? Is this the end?" Right? And I think that faith, and specifically in understanding, and when I think of faith, I think about fear in the same sentence. And I think that faith and fear are the exact opposite of each other. So I think that choosing faith is choosing the unexpected, and it's choosing that there is, and I believe this, there is a plan for you, but you need to go get it. Versus fear to me is more complacency. Fear is you're comfortable. Fear is, well, they're never going to fire me for seeing 45 visits a week or 30 visits a week or whatever the number is at whatever clinic you work at. I'm comfortable.
Mhm.
They're never going to fire me for not taking another Con Ed course or not using Graston tools or not using dry needles or not manipulating that patient that needs to be manipulated, right? Because people like me. But that's comfort. Comfort is the killer of dreams. And we often have to remind ourselves of that too, because when you reach a certain level of success, people start looking at you and saying, "Oh, well, you're successful. You have 5 clinics. You have this great company. You have, X amount of people that are working with you, right?" That's great. That's not my mission, right? Like our mission is something bigger. It's really to change the field. It's to elevate, you know, to hopefully elevate people that want to do more in this field, right?
Mhm.
Not just be staff clinicians. We want to give people opportunities to grow and not just be the status quo clinician, to make more money, to create advantages that I never had coming into the
Mhm.
field.
Yeah.
So
Y
that to me is the difference. I really think about faith as trust in God. You have to take action, right? You pray that God is, you're taking action in a focused way. And God is only going to help you. He's not going to give it to you, right?
Mhm.
That's the way that I look
You
at it.
also have to have faith in yourself.
Well, that's really what it
Yeah.
is, right? And I think
Yeah.
that it's so easy never to start a business or a new job or a new relationship or move into that new house because it's uncomfortable and it's scary, right? Like you might have a new payment that you may not be able to make, you know, but what if you can make it,
Mhm.
right? Like what if that new job is the best decision that you ever made?
Mhm.
The what ifs are where we live. And again, I mean, I'm a challenger personality type, and that's just what I love to do. But my faith in God is what allows me to not only challenge, but to continue through the fear because the fear is just, it can be all consuming,
Absolutely.
especially in down months. You have 3 pay period months, or you have months that, you don't hit the targets. There's anxiety, there's fear, and I never let it show, but it gets to you. So I think just driving forward and being an example you know, of the leader you hope to be that someday.
Yeah. I want to read the last sentence here in this 11th lesson that you wrote. Deepen your faith and allow it to illuminate every aspect of your journey. By embracing a profound spiritual connection, you unlock enduring joy, purpose, and the strength to surmount all obstacles. And that's just something that not just for, a new grad reading 11 lessons for growth and success in physical therapy, but just something to really live by, really illuminating every aspect of your journey and surmounting all obstacles. That's really true fulfillment in life, right? And that's what we're all here for, right? We're all to have that fulfillment of us being here on earth. And I think that that's something really to, highlight and something to really think about.
It's so easy to get lost. I'm talking to the PTs that have been out maybe for a year to 2, 3 years. It's so easy to get lost, right? What's next? What's next? What do I need to be doing? When in reality, it's right in front of you.
Mm.
You're touching lives, right? You're affecting people's lives in a positive manner. What we're doing with this business is just increasing that reach, right?
Mhm.
So my goal is to touch 1 million lives, hopefully within 10 years. We'll see if that happens. But I think that we're probably getting pretty close, you
Yeah.
know? Um, but imagine that impact versus, whatever it is, 50, 60 visits a week, or 2,500 visits a year, touch points a year.
Mhm.
I think about that. Think about how many people as a PT, you've helped and healed, and think about that journey and what you're doing for other people's lives. And I think it'll help you get through those dark times where you're like, is this all that I'm doing for the rest of my life? There is more to the job than just that,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. You're a
Good.
smarty. I love you.
Love you.
That's it.